This shot looks great, right? But this is what it looked like in camera. And this is one of the biggest reasons we underexpose our S-LOG3 footage. We want an image to have a healthy level of contrast, but the problem is Rec. 709 footage that hasn't been color graded is kind of flat. There's not a whole lot of contrast. So what happens is we often underexpose our image, which gives it a false sense of contrast because we're bringing down the midtones and shadows and giving them a little extra weight. So on our camera screen, it looks nice and we set the exposure here. But when we bring it into post-production and convert it, we realize that we actually have to lift our levels up, and this results in a noisy image. In fact, a lot of professional cinematographers shoot at an exposure where they actually need to bring down the exposure in post-production because this results in the cleanest image possible. Now imagine you need to build out some Lego pictures and they give you 100 blocks to do it. They give you an even amount of black, dark gray, light gray, and white. But before you begin, they give you the option to trade some of those blocks out for other shades. Now, if you're given a picture like this, it's likely you're going to be pretty confident building this out using the blocks that you've been given. But if you get a picture like this, it's likely you're going to want to trade in some of those light gray and white blocks to allow for more dark gray and black blocks. Because otherwise, you're going to realize that you're not going to have enough to build out the picture and there's going to be some missing pieces. Now imagine if instead of Lego blocks, we're talking about pixels, and what we're really looking at is exposing our image. And when we don't have enough dark gray and black blocks, what we really end up with is a noisy image. But when we overexpose, we're giving ourselves more dark gray and black blocks to work with. So we don't always need to overexpose. Sometimes a scene is living in the midtones and the highlights, but a lot of scenes do live in the midtones and below. And for scenes like that, it's more beneficial to trade off some of the highlights so that we can have more information to work with in the shadows. Typically, we set our zebras to let us know when we're clipping the highlights. And basically this just means we're losing information because it's too bright. And this is my zebra setting for S-LOG3 in the log view to let me know when I'm losing information in the highlights. So just a quick clarification on why you should use the log view to check where you're losing information. If you import LUTs into your camera, which I'm going to get into later, then the value at which you're going to see those zebras of clipping information, it's going to change from LUT to LUT. And if you're not changing your zebra settings when you're switching back and forth between different LUTs, then what's going to happen is you're going to be seeing a false representation of where you're actually losing information. So you're either going to be losing information that you thought you had saved, or you're going to be underexposing, trying to save information that wasn't really getting lost in the first place. But when it comes to the log view, this view is always giving you a true representation of your exposure. So once you set up your zebra settings in this view, it's always going to be telling you the truth on whether or not you're losing information. So now that we have our zebras set up in our log profile, we need to make sure that we're saving all the information that we need to save in our scene. Now when it comes to direct light sources like the sun, lamps, or other practical lights like tube lights or fluorescent lights, it's fine for these to be clipping because we don't actually need the information within the light. And reflections of these lights are treated the same way. So if you get a hit of light on a shiny surface, it's okay for us to see zebras in this location. So depending on your scene and your camera settings, you're either going to want to increase your exposure until you see we start to lose information and then bring it back a hair, or we're already losing information and we need to start dialing back until we see that we're saving all of the information we need to save in our scene. So then the question becomes, where do I set the exposure? What I'll do for dark scenes is I'll overexpose by 2 stops, which I'll get into more about what that means, but I'll typically overexpose by about 2 stops, which is giving me more information in the shadows at the trade-off, of course, of the highlights. Typically, you either have a dark scene where a lot of things are living below or at middle gray, or you'll have a balanced scene where your subject is at middle gray and you have a balance of highlights and shadows. So for scenes like that, if I can, I like to overexpose by 1 stop because I still want to keep my shadows really clean. So I want to give them extra information. So how do we know that we're overexposing by a stop or 2 stops? A lot of people rely on the exposure meter in their camera, but the problem is this changes so much with how we frame our image. If I move the camera from a wide to a close-up, I may get a significantly different reading on the exposure meter, but I obviously want to keep the exposure the same if nothing has changed lighting-wise. Now you can use a gray card, which will actually give you an accurate reading on the exposure meter, but the problem is this relies on another tool. And oftentimes we're either out filming ourselves or filming something on the fly, whether it's a documentary or an event. And so we need something that we can do with the camera in our hands without relying on any external tools. That's where the Alistair Chapman offset LUTs come in. These LUTs are free. And what you do with these LUTs is you put them in your camera or your external monitor if you do have one, and it will show you what your S-LOG3 footage will look like when converted to Rec. 709. But we actually have options for 1 stop, 2 stop, half a stop, whatever we want. So what that means is if I put on the -2 exposure LUT, this LUT isn't showing me where my exposure is now. It's letting me know where my exposure will be when I bring it into post-production and then bring the exposure down in post. So for example, for a dark scene, I'll go in my log view with my zebras and I'll bring it up until I'm starting to lose information. And then I'll start to bring it down so that I know all the information is there. Then I'll turn on my -2 stop LUT and I'll start to bring down the image until it looks nice. So now I know I've saved all the information in my scene that's important and that I'm roughly 2 stops overexposed. So when I bring it into post-production and I bring down the exposure, I have a very clean image. I highly suggest, in fact, I'm basically telling you to set a custom button to turn this LUT on and off. And if you don't have a custom button, you can set it in the function menu, but I would even trade off something like a white balance custom button for this, because white balance is something that you may change from scene to scene, but something like your exposure is constantly changing, especially if you're working on the fly with natural lighting, or just if you're moving from place to place. This workflow usually results in 2 scenarios. One, you have a properly exposed image because you underexposed when trying to overexpose, so you just kind of level out your own mistake, because like I said in the beginning, it's very easy to underexpose S-LOG3, or you end up with overexposed footage, which you need to accurately bring down in post-production. And what I do in DaVinci Resolve is use the HDR wheels. And to make it more accurate, you can go in and set your camera's color space and gamma, but you won't need to do this if you've already converted your camera's color space and gamma to your timeline color space and gamma. And my goal is to give you all the tools you need to be a filmmaker, whether that's cinematography, color grading, editing, storytelling. I'm sharing everything I've learned to get to where I am today and everything I learn along the way. So if that interests you, you can stick around, and I appreciate you watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.